Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Stable School Podcast, live from Cannes. I'm your host, Raza, head of growth at Scroll, and I'm here with Remi from Inco. Remi,
Hey,
welcome.
Raza. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Please introduce yourself and tell us what is Inco.
Yeah, so my name is Remi. I'm the founder of Inco. Inco, you can think of as kind of like a confidentiality layer for blockchains. Maybe a short story is, the early internet was completely transparent, and you could just monitor everything happening, right, throughout the communication layer. It's really until when you had SSL TLS, the encryption layer, that you started to encrypt information on chain, and then suddenly you can do things like private payments. You can start basically hiding information on this transport layer, right? So you can think of Inco kind of like a encryption or privacy layer for blockchains in that sense. So kind of like the HTTPS but for blockchain.
And so we briefly spoke about it, offline, bringing it into the episode. We see a rise of privacy solutions, some more enshrined on protocol level, some like enshrined in the chain. Where does Inco fit in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So privacy has been around for quite some time. I'll say the one that everybody knows is probably Zcash, one of the earlier privacy chain. I think you can really think of privacy as basically like a feature that can be added at a different level, at different stack. So you can obviously implement privacy at the chain level, which is Zcash. You can also implement privacy kind of like at a co-processor level, which is a different stack. Or you can implement privacy at a protocol level, which is, for example, Tornado Cash, right? So really, privacy can be added across different levels of the stack. And the way Inco is positioned is basically becoming the privacy layer for existing blockchains.
Okay, cool. So let me try to visualize that.
Yeah.
You have a chain, let's say Ethereum.
Yeah.
The transactions there, whatever you want to do, payments, DeFi. So do you then integrate is your target audience then the developers and the application builders, or is there a UI for users?
Yeah, so basically, I think the way to think about Inco is similar to Chainlink. So we enable a library on top of Ethereum and other blockchains. And then from there, basically, we enable new data types and compute capabilities. So for example, a new data type is EUINT, encrypted integer. So that's what you would use to encrypt your balance. And you can also compute on top of them, like add, divide, multiply, without having to decrypt. So that's kind of like what the product or the protocol looks like from a developer perspective. So it is definitely more of a developer tool. But from a end user perspective, let's say of the combinational token, essentially you just have to use your MetaMask. So we abstract away all the complexities. If you want to do a confidential transfer, you just use your MetaMask, encrypt the amount that you want to do on the front end, and cast a transaction on Ethereum, Base, Polygon, etc.
So I'll reiterate if I understand this correctly. So if an application doesn't integrate Inco, technically speaking, the user doesn't have access to it, or is it like there's some permissionless way where the user could enable privacy using Inco on?
So the first step is having the developer write a confidential smart contract and deploy on Ethereum. Mm-hmm. The user will have to use a confidential app, DApp, built by the developer.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. So the TLDR would be as a developer tool, and you guys enable applications to basically have a privacy feature.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you're a smart contract engineer, I remember when I first got into space in 2017, I always felt it was a little bit weird that everything was transparent in EVM. And so you can't even do things like poker, right? You can build a poker game because you have to hide the cards. And it's a bluffing game. It wouldn't make sense if everyone can see the cards, right? Little things like this really shows that, you have public blockchains where everything's transparent. But if you think about applications in Web2, whether you're using eBay, YouTube, or Uber, there's always private information behind the scene, behind a server, right? So we're lacking a lot of these Web2 privacy patterns in Web3 today. And so this is kind of where Inco comes in by enabling these private states like encrypted booleans, integers, addresses, strings. We can recreate a lot of these Web2 privacy patterns in Web3 on a public blockchain. And given you cannot really hide states behind a server in Web3, the only way to achieve this is via encryption. So if I encrypt your balance, it is hidden by default, right? So it's basically hiding states on the blockchain via encryption.
Cool. And so, not to throw buzzwords like FHE and ZK around, like I mean, like you often see these are the two main forms of, let's say, either encryption or like, ZK is not like necessarily encryption, but you build you write a proof for any data that you want to like validate. What do you guys use like under the hood?
Yeah, so the Inco protocol is kind of like a general purpose compute protocol. We have two products. So we have one that's TE based, and then the other one is FHE MPC. The underlying interface is going to be very similar or the same for the two different products. It's really kind of like, what are you using behind the scene to do the computation? And so generally speaking, we think of privacy into kind of two categories. So commitment-based solutions, which is ZK, and then encryption-based solutions, which is MPC, FHE, TE. So MPC, FHE, and TE sort of can achieve the same form factor or properties as a category.
So when you look at, let's say, the trade-offs,
yeah,
whether that is performance or whether that is like even to the level of, let's say, privacy that you keep, how does that differ to, let's say, what is out there today? So what would be a differentiator? And then the second thing is, how does that fit in, let's say, with something like Solidity? Is it just like a few, like just a library that you like install and then a few extra data, different type of data types are available? Do I see that correctly?
Yeah. So from a user or developer, I think these are actually the core users, are going to be the developers. The encryption-based system is going to be a little bit more straightforward. So it's going to look like Solidity. So it's just new data types, and then you can just add, divide, multiply in Solidity, right? Typically with ZK-based solutions, because it's a different form factor, you have a prover, you have a verifier, you have to write ZK circuits. Typically, there's a new different language, different tooling. Yeah. The way you program things are also a little bit different, right? So, for example, in ZK, what's sort of lacking in ZK for privacy is this concept of composability, but not composability with public state, right? So that works with ZK, but more composability over private states. So what do I mean by that? So, for example, if I want to build a private AMM and also have a private balance, these two cannot really compose with each other in ZK. And that's really because typically in the ZK system, you have like a viewing key, and you can't really have a smart contract holding like a viewing key, right, to keep their own states. So you sort of break composability because every time you have to generate ZK proof, and you just can't rechain private states in an atomic manner, right? In the encryption-based system, we have something that we call shared private states. So I can always do atomic state transitions via encryption-based techniques like FHE, which allows you to do computes without having to decrypt, or TEs, which is the same thing, but essentially you're just decrypting inside the enclave and computing over plain text, right? So the idea is that for something like, for example, like a confidential token, people can build things like private AMM, lending, governance on top of it, and you're able to, for example, query someone's private balance and then cast a private vote. So you have sort of this like atomic composability over this shared private states using a more encryption-based technique than ZK. So I'll say that's one thing that basically stands out in terms of form factor. In terms of scaling, I actually think commitment-based solutions are more scalable long-term. The reason why is because you can offload the compute on the user side, right? Generate ZK proof and just verify on chain. Typically with encryption-based techniques, it's a shared key system. So in FHE, it's MPC based. In TE, it's TE key. You sort of have to have the, you sort of have to depend on the coprocessor of the blockchain to do the state transitions on behalf of everyone. Obviously, there are ways you can also scale this by parallelizing, et cetera. But from a scalability perspective, long term, I think, there are significant trade-offs between the two types of compute.
So more on a UX level, what that means is potentially like, to scale to make it cheaper, ZK could be there.
Yeah.
And then, encryption like on-chain or, I'm not sure if can you call it on-chain encryption, an additional layer of encryption on-chain, I guess. That comes at a cost.
Yes and no. So in a sense, when we do state transitions on Ethereum, we're not really doing the actual FHE computes or the T computes. What you're really doing is you're sort of like executing this in a more symbolic manner. So you're basically emitting events and then queuing the coprocessor level to mirror execute that. And so because of that, the cost is actually not as high. Because obviously doing FHE on chain would be kind of insane in Solidity. And then with TEs, you just can't do this on Ethereum, right? So it's more of a coprocessor architecture. So the cost is actually fairly minimal in that sense, on-chain cost. And it's actually very scalable as well, because you just end up emitting a bunch of events that you can process in parallel without impacting the throughput of the whole chain. And actually, I think that actually brings a point where I wanted to mention is that if you think of where applying privacy to, right? You could apply it to the chain level, or you could apply it, off-chain, right? The challenge with applying this to the chain level is that you will impact the throughput of the origin chain, no matter what, right? Whether using TEs and PCFHE, it is going to be slower than plain text computes. Even with TEs, you still have, at least 10, 20% overhead, right? And the reality is, privacy is more of a feature in the sense that like not all applications need it. So why integrate this to the base layer if you can just offload it to the off-chain, right?
Just depending on the use case.
Exactly. So the way we design our product is that if you need to incorporate privacy to your app, whether it's a payment app, governance, gaming, then you can just opt in. It's very similar to how HTTP and HTTPS came to be, right? So TLS, SSL is actually a separate layer. It's not inside TCP/IP. It's actually on top of it, right? So it's a very similar, I would say, design thinking. And also, if you wanted to innovate and upgrade the encryption layer, we can do it separately without having to impact the base chain. Also, you do have to go through this like whole coordination, governance, chain upgrade, which is very difficult to coordinate and takes time. So there are many reasons why I do believe privacy should be incorporated more as a off-chain compute layer that's verifiable rather than like at the base layer.
Yeah, and that's actually, because this, we're getting into the weeds of like how it's technically designed, but obviously Inco exists for a reason. And to like pivot a little bit, like you guys wrote a article or a paper with Circle, I believe.
Yeah, so it's we collaborate with Circle Research on this confidential ERC20 framework.
Yeah, and so tell me a little bit about that framework and how does it impact the USDC stablecoin.
Yeah, so essentially the idea of that paper is really proposing a new framework for privacy, but also thinking about compliance, right? And like we discussed previously, privacy is going to be needed for mass adoption. Today, I can see everyone's balance. I can see how much everyone's making, what people are buying. It's just not the way we're used to in Web 2. And if we were to onboard 1 billion people today on chain, it would actually be social chaos. People would be targeted, by kidnappers. Your neighbors will know how much you're making.
We're already seeing it. Like there was some recent events, like in Paris, where
pretty crazy, right?
Pretty crazy.
Yeah, pretty crazy. And obviously, a lot of this information is also PII, so payroll information. You're actually not supposed to put this on chain in many jurisdictions. So today, I do believe we're kind of early, so it's kind of a little bit gray. But as this stablecoin movement, becomes bigger and bigger, and there are actual practical adoption of stablecoins on chain, you really will need to have privacy figured out, basically. I do believe it is kind of early right now. That's also why privacy is not quite there yet in terms of like market penetration. And if you think about a lot of these like applications that are more centralized and consumer-like, it's just a bunch of IOUs. They change on the back end. Nothing really happens on chain. So that's how they do privacy today. But as we actually do start shifting more towards on-chain economy, this is where privacy needs to happen, basically.
Yeah. So how does this? So, what am I calling this right? Confidential USDC is called, or?
So it's a confidential token.
Yeah.
It's actually general purpose. So the way this works is there's a wrapper that gets deployed on Ethereum. You can send any ERC20 into the wrapper, which returns you a confidential token. So it's similar to like a Lido, where you deploy like a wrapper contract, and then gives you staked ETH back, right? So this is going to be compatible with any tokens. So whether it's USDC, DAI, or even like wormhole tokens, or just basically any ERC20s. And what it does is it's going to shield the amount that you hold. and also shield the amount that you transfer to others.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to visualize how that works, right? So essentially, I'm minting, let's say, a privacy version of USDC, and then I hold, let's say, 1,000 confidential USDC in my wallet. What does someone else see in my wallet?
Yeah. So essentially, if you look on chain, your balance will be encrypted. So you'll be in bytes. So you can't really tell how much this person has. And when you send money to someone else, on Etherscan, they'll be able to see that person A has some money to person B, just not the amount. The amount will be also encrypted, basically gibberish on Etherscan. There are points where there is information leakage. So basically, there are two ways you can get confidential USDC, for example. One is by sending regular USDC into the wrapper contract. So when you do that, that obviously leaks information, right? So if I send in 1,000 USDC, people can tell, okay, there's 1,000 USDC that's being minted, that's confidential, right? The other way is to mint it natively, which basically will have a little bit more of an enhanced confidentiality. So you can directly mint a confidential amount. Now, the way in practice that you use this is like, for example, for something like a payroll, a company can wrap 100K worth of USDC, turn that into a confidential USDC, and then send a confidential amount to different employees. And then they can decide how much they want to unwrap, right? Any arbitrary amounts, or they can keep it, confidential and then transfer to each other. So that's kind of like the UX. It's kind of like a Venmo, more like a Venmo than a tornado cash, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that the first thing that I think of privacy is Tornado Cash, and we all know like how that unfolded and the recent developments there. How do you view like privacy versus regulation?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't know this, but basically privacy can be broken down into confidentiality and anonymity. Privacy essentially is a spectrum. So you have more vanilla privacy, which is confidentiality. I'm only hiding the balances, the metadata. And then you have something a little bit more hardcore privacy, which is breaking the linkage between sender and recipient. What's really challenging from a compliance perspective is that obviously, privacy is great, but the bad actors love it, right? Because of it. It's you can actually launder funds, etc. We've seen this with Lazarus and Tornado Cash. So you definitely want to have some kind of compliance, like AML in place, make sure the users are not on the OFAC list, etc. So compliance is actually quite useful and actually does protect society. A lot of people might think compliance is more of a hindrance, but I also argue that compliance is also going to help on the adoption of privacy. One example I gave earlier is, for example, like payroll information. That's PII information. And there will be compliance law that will say, hey, you're not supposed to leak that information on a public blockchain. So that type of compliance requirements would actually help on the adoption of privacy, right? So I think today, privacy has had a couple of cycles. We went from a lot of the ZK-based technologies, and now we have a little bit more different types of technologies like MPC, FHE, TE. And we are starting to better understand the use cases and requirements a little bit more too. And also what happened with Tornado Cash, the ruling, et cetera. I think there's a little bit more clarity. We're not quite there yet in terms of like pure, like 100% clarity yet. But at least there are a few things that we know that, yeah, you should probably not have folks on the OFAC list use your product, et cetera. So there are already things in place that you could already customize for your products. But generally speaking, I'll say like, yeah, if you are dealing with confidentiality, the risk is definitely a lot lower because it's just, more traceable. But if you're dealing with something more like anonymity, then you definitely want to have some KYC, KYB process in place based on what we've seen so far, basically.
Yeah, I like how you said like privacy is a spectrum, because I think that the more common approach I see now is it's not necessarily like at a moment of time where something is disputed, you're more than happy to showcase that nothing dodgy is going on. But at the same time, it's not necessarily that you're hiding something, but I can imagine no one wants like their coworkers to see how much money they're making. And so but are you any type, are you worried about perhaps a new administration or something changing? I mean, like, you're explaining this to me right now. Many people still, when they hear privacy, they're kind of like a bit taken away and scared because of the association that people have with it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it is one of the reasons why I would say privacy has not gotten so much funding, or at least in the recent years, is all that the concerns that you mentioned, right? Nobody wants to end up in jail. Like, it's a little bit taboo. There are ways to navigate this. I would say ultimately it boils down to what are the risks that you're facing. With something like confidentiality, because you're just hiding the amounts, the flow of funds are traceable. It's a pretty bad tool for money laundering. Like, in the sense that like chain analysis could plot the entire flow of funds, even though the amounts are hidden, but you can still plot out the entire flow of funds. So not a great tool for money laundering. So the risks are definitely a lot lower versus if you're offering a product that's more of a mixer, breaking the linkage between sender and recipient. This is where you do want to make sure you're enforcing the right set of compliance, preventing the bad actors, right? So this is where you incur the most risk as a founder and as a project. But I'll say if you're an enterprise institution, typically you already KYC, KYB your end user. So the risk, I would say, are a lot lower for these folks, right? So I think it really depends on what use case, what private use case you're trying to achieve, and what level of compliance enforcement can you do as an institution, bank, or company, right? And on the use case side, confidentiality is more vanilla, but it is already useful for things like payroll or even supply chain payment, where you know who the actors are. You just want to hide the amounts. But obviously, if you want to do like political donation, or if you want to hide the fact that you visited a medical facility, you'd probably want anonymity, because these are information that you don't want to leak, for example.
Interesting.
So I think it really depends on the use case, what you're trying to achieve, and then choose the right privacy tool, and also think through like what are the compliance framework that I'm applying or need to apply based on the use case I'm trying to achieve here.
And so, maybe going like in that route of regulation, I believe you're part, or Inco's part of the Confidential Token Association. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so basically we're in the process of standardizing this new confidential token. So we're working with folks like OpenZeppelin and other companies in the space. The idea really is to come out together with a set of interfaces so that we can all agree on something that we can all build towards. And the reason for that is if you think about the way DeFi is built today, it's ERC20 with Uniswap, Aave, Compound. But it's using all the same basic primitives, which is the ERC20. And you do want to get the interfaces and features right. So for example, like if there's no allowance on the ERC20 contract without transfer from, you can't rebuild DeFi, right? That's kind of like the first thing you need. So confidential token will have a set of interfaces similar to that are going to be very necessary and useful. So like private allowance, or even be able to delegate viewing to, let's say, your CPA, etc. So a lot of the work we do with the Confidential Token Association is sort of like collectively try to come up with the best set of interfaces, and then so that we can maximize composability and network effects down the line for integrations, for all the people to build DeFi on top, etc. So that's really the purpose of the association.
Do you think that privacy, or maybe confidentiality, but better said, like will be the default in the near future? Or because right now, pretty much any chain that like chains popping up, stablecoins popping up left and right.
Yeah.
And pretty much everyone is building for scale and going fast and user adoption. And in crypto, there might even be like something like, hey, look at my bags kind of thing. But I think that for the masses, do you think that this is going to be the default in the next few years?
Yeah, that's a good question. My take on this is that I think DeFi will still use plain text stablecoins, right? Either for trading, lending, etc. There are definitely benefits in having these primitives to be in plain text in terms of efficiency, market making, etc. Building private DeFi is quite challenging in general, but also generally speaking, I think like these primitives are pretty mature, and there are ways that you can interact with existing DeFi, which isn't necessarily like confidentiality, right? So if you look at Aztec, Railgun, like you are able to interact with the existing liquidity. But I would say for payment use cases, yes, I think confidentiality will be default at some point, because why not, right? It is the kind of like the superior UX. If I can hide how much money I have by default, then why not do this, right? Especially if I can always unwrap to interact with regular DeFi, then it's sort of like, yeah, like why shouldn't I just shield my assets by default? But for DeFi purpose, I do think, yeah, plain text USDC, for example, is going to be a little bit easier to build and have more liquidity. I would say, yeah. So yeah, I guess like my point is for payments, I do think confidentiality is great. And then for DeFi, I think plain text tokens would be a little bit better here.
What do you see as the biggest hurdle to get to that stage where, you know, this almost becomes by default, or like everyone is just like, when you launch a new protocol or when you're doing something like right now in the go-to-market, like that, this is probably not in your checklist. But yeah, what is there a technical hurdle, a regulatory hurdle, or it's like, you know, product development? What do you think is like the biggest hurdle right now to get to that stage?
I think one of the hurdle is I think it's the UX challenge. A lot of the privacy solutions today are still not very ergonomic. You either have to have a new wallet, new DSL, or have to move to a new chain. So there are just a lot more friction points for people to adopt. I think we're solving a lot of that with our tech stack. We're actually trying to create something that's the easiest to use, where we're compatible with existing toolings like MetaMask, Coinbase wallets, multi-sigs, etc. We're also implementing this to existing blockchains, which, you know, really avoids you the hassle from like moving from one chain to another. I think the UX is there. So I think I'm actually quite excited about privacy this year. I think we've solved a lot of the UX problems over the past different cycles. We kind of know what are the, you know, historical friction points. The second part I would say is more around actual business requirements. And I would say we are seeing a lot more pull, a lot more interest in privacy right now than, like, let's say a year ago. And I think part of it is because of the stablecoin movement, right? It's I think people are taking on-chain payment use case a lot more seriously. And like I said before, like payroll leaks a lot of PI information that, you know, in many jurisdiction would not basically make sense. Right now it's a little bit early, a little bit gray, but as we shift towards more mainstream adoption, I think a lot of these requirements are going to be a lot more necessary to have on-chain privacy. Same thing with RWAs. You know, when you generate yields, etc., you are leaking a lot of PI information, right? So I would say, like, as more assets actually move on chain and the on chain economy actually becomes a thing, then I think privacy will be a lot more urgent. Right now, a lot of these things are happening off chain, you know, behind a server, a bunch of IOUs. So that's how privacy is being preserved today, right? But as we start shifting that towards on chain, it is going to be one of these things that people are going to be thinking about. And I do think Web3 as a whole, you know, privacy is really just one of these last frontiers that hasn't been solved. Like you mentioned, people are doing scalability. Interop is like getting there as well. I would say interop and privacy are probably the last two frontiers that personally I'm excited about. And I think it's going to sort of make this whole like blockchain space whole by, you know, retaking blockchain to be this coordination layer, like that vision to basically to mass adoption, right?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think that, you know, even anecdotally, when I talk to people in my environment, they still like baffled by the fact that anyone can see anything. They understand it. I think that there's a point of understanding where people are getting there, but it's just like not what people want.
You know, my thoughts on that is because I think still in crypto, it's still mostly a toy. Like in the sense that, like, you're not using it for really serious matters, right? Like even when I go to a doctor, I'm not using crypto to pay my doctor. Because if I start doing that, then I'll be like, oh shit, I'm leaking information, right? Or what if I'm buying a bunch of stuff online? I don't want people to know what I'm buying. But the reality is I'm still using my credit card, etc. So I think crypto obviously has gone through several waves of adoption already. We're still not to a point where people are fully on chain. So that pain point of like, oh, I'm leaking everything is not quite there yet. We are getting there, I would say, like especially this year, as enterprise commerce are adopting stablecoins as the payment rail. I would say that's probably why it's like it hasn't been this, the urgency for privacy hasn't been this strong until more recently, I would say.
I think, you know what, I really like this point, because I think that obviously there's serious amount in crypto. We're starting to see it closer and closer, you know, by having, you know, end-to-end experiences like payment. It's here.
Yeah.
It's coming, like virtual bank accounts coming here, and you know that's like really connecting the on-chain and off-chain world. But because these mass use cases, and maybe there are some there that like I've overlooked, but really day to day, you know, they're just not there yet. And then from that point of view, I think that I'm a heavy believer in abstraction. So at some point, chains products will be abstracted away, Web3 as a feature.
Yeah.
And then it's just like any other payment network, right? But this payment network, you don't have to worry about, like, no one can go onto the Swift network, or like only a few institutions can do that. And if you send me a wire transfer, well, like, as far as I know, you can't query that right now and find out that you send me like an X amount.
Yeah.
You could do that, however difficult it is, to reverse engineer on chain.
So the question is that how do you bring that UX that we have in Web 2 to Web 3 while on the public blockchain? So still basically have the transparency that people want and still make it private, right? So I think that's like a very unique set of challenge. And what's always been missing, I would say, until recently is the ability to have privacy in a verifiable manner. So in a sense, like, we still want to be on a public blockchain. Like, we've seen this, right? People tried private blockchains in the past, Hyperledger, etc. These are very siloed, right? They want to be on a public blockchain, these institutions, but you also need privacy, but you want that privacy to be as safe and verifiable, right? So the challenge is to how do you merge the two and come up with a new form of UX that makes sense, basically.
Yeah, 100%. And so when you look at Inco and where Inco is going, you mentioned two parts of the product right now. So if you could give me like a recap of like what Inco does right now, but where are you going? Like, are you like, is the product still in development? Is there some cool new feature that you guys are working on?
Yeah, so we have a first version on Base Deploy today. So if you're a developer, you can already try out our library. So I know we talked a lot about payment today, but Inco really is more of a general purpose infra. With these new data types, you can actually build a bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with payment, right? Like private governance, you can do blind auction, you can do gaming, like on-chain poker.
Yeah, you mentioned poker. That's such a good example, actually. I remember like there were some ZK-based poker games because of like, I don't know what the reference, imperfect or perfect game, but you kind of like there's like there needs to be an asymmetry of like information. You can't know everything, that's a good example.
And also, if you think about poker, right, in Web 2, all these websites that offer online gambling, they always kind of have to like show, hey, our randomness is like provably verifiable, something, right?
Yeah.
In Web 3, it's actually great because that is a must-have requirement. Like basically, whatever we offer in Web 3, it has to be provably secure and verifiable, else nobody's going to use it, right? So I'm actually quite excited about that direction as well. I think if you think about like crypto in general, obviously there's almost two camps, speculations and then fintech. But in both cases, you do need some kind of like privacy or the ability to hide information. So in many ways, I actually don't even see Inco as a privacy project. We see ourselves more like a developer tool that sort of completes the blockchain UX, right? So public states, private states, you need to be able to hide information on chain and then program access control, right? Like, for example, if you wanted to build something like a Udemy course, right? Like on-chain Udemy marketplace, you want to be able to encrypt information, and when someone pays for it, be able to decrypt, right? So it's not necessarily like a privacy use case. It's just a Web2 privacy programming pattern that has always been missing Web3. And our library basically helps achieve that.
Honestly, one of the takeaways for me is like privacy on a spectrum, but it feels like confidentiality is like a better way of framing it. Like keeping certain pieces of information, like, confident. I mean, that makes more sense for me if I'm framing it. I really like the poker game, just like double clicking on it. Like, let's say someone's seeing this and they want to build a poker game. I know like when it comes to like hiding pieces of information, the architecture becomes really complex. It's really gas intense, or there's like a huge off-chain component. You're essentially saying these use cases, these type of like use cases are very efficiently enabled.
Yeah. I would say this is also coming back to, ZK versus encryption-based techniques. If you want to build any use case that involves multiple parties, like a multiplayer use case, it's just going to be a lot easier to use like MPC, FHETE, rather than ZK. For example, like the way you do like the cards shuffling in ZK is a couple rounds and it's all off chain. So you need some kind of like middleman to coordinate, and it just becoming a lot more complicated versus, if you just need some kind of composability or need coordination, just use a smart contract and everyone interacts with it, right? So for example, private governance, if you want to build a private governance contract with Inco, it's only a couple lines of code, really a couple lines of code, right? If you want to build private governance in ZK, you're going to write tons of code, circuits, off-chain coordination, and still you need some kind of like centralized entity to tally all these votes, which could leak information, right? So I would say, generally speaking, like any use case that requires coordination among multiple parties for any shared private state, I would say encryption-based techniques are going to be a lot easier to use as a developer in general. But yeah, if you want to have more like prove your identity, like your passport, something more of a solo use case, then I think ZK works great.
Yeah. And so like, definitely like learned a lot and new insights on, let's say, confidentiality. What is next for Inco? Where are you guys going?
So next step for us is to go mainnet. So today we have a testnet on base Polia. The plan for Inco is to integrate other blockchains like Arbitrum, Polygon, Ethereum. We'll also be looking to Solana. The goal for us is basically be the confidentiality layer for existing blockchains, public blockchains. I think our position is a bit more unique. We're not a separate chain. We want to make the UX as seamless as possible. And so that's basically the next step. And I'm pretty involved in supporting builders that want to build new primitives, new applications on Inco across the board, right? So private payments, DeFi, blind auction, governance. We work with some of the biggest governance platforms. For folks like Toku, for example, that want to do payroll, on-chain payroll, or even gaming companies, right? So I would say, really we're quite excited to push for all of these new use cases that wouldn't work otherwise, and try to advance the space from a different angle, just adding new use cases, metrics to different chains, and getting people excited about privacy again. But like I said, I don't like the term privacy as much. I think it's very broad. It's more about enabling newer experiences that are practical, or could be really fun, right? Like poker or guessing games. Like we have like an on-chain guessing game, like a hangman, or scratch cards. Like all these things, basically, yeah, you need to hide information. So yeah, I think a lot of them are going to be a lot of fun use cases, a lot of bluffing use cases, and a lot of payment use cases that are obviously more serious and practical.
Yeah, I definitely think that this will unlock, the growth for stablecoins. Like I said, for the past 2 days, been talking to a lot of people, and consistently I've been hearing compliance and privacy. And I agree with you. I think that, a better word for it, I like confidentiality better, to frame like what we need, and to basically like protect your personal information. Remi, like I appreciate you joining. Thanks a lot. Good luck to Inco, and looking forward to having you on again to see where Inco's landed.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. And hopefully next time we'll have a lot more adoption in real use cases to basically showcase, hey, this is the amount of people using Inco, privacy, private payments. We'll have something a lot more tangible that people can try out.
Amazing. Thank you.